Do. Can people hear me? Yeah, microphone is working. Okay, hello boys and girls, welcome to the party. We are on schedule, which is super awesome. I'm going to start sharing the screen and away. Good. Okay, there we go. Away we go. Cool. So apologize for the weird background sound. It sounds like a vacuum cleaner come industrial engine. It's my computer dying of Ebola and various other diseases, but it keeps chugging on. All right, so we're kicking off from where we were yesterday. So if you remember, at the last group, we were talking about goats and the horizontal pupils being kind of cool. Now we're going on to the Hippotragini, which are the grazing antelope. These are the true plains and desert antelope. So these guys are widespread throughout Africa. Oops. They're adapted for living under low water conditions and poor grazing. So they have a very good water retention ability, and they're highly adapted to living far from water sources. They can often go for many days, if not weeks, without drawing water. In fact, a lot of their nutrition comes, a lot of their water comes from the plants that they actually digest, or the plants that they actually consume. So the males and females are both born with horns, but the male's horns are typically larger. So there is a bit of sexual dimorphism, but not too much with these species. Okay, so there are 3 genera, and there are 7 species. The one that we all know and love is the Sable, the Roan, or 2 species, but the Sable is more well known. And of course the Gemsbok, which we're not mentioning here because everyone knows it. But a lot of people don't realize that Gemsbok is an Oryx, and there's actually 5 different species of Oryx. And the last, of course, is that is the Adax, which is limited to Northern Africa. Once had a wider distribution into Saudi Arabia as well, but it has been eliminated from those areas due to hunting, and it is now just limited to the Central Sahara region and some parts, southern aspects of Northern Africa. Okay, so we talked last time with giraffes having a Rete Mirabella. I love rolling the R. But to remind you guys what that is, that's a special series of veins and capillaries in the nasal cavity, which helps cool the blood as it enters the brain. So as the blood pumps towards the brain, it passes over the capillaries which are fed into the nose, and the two basically do a heat exchange. So cool blood is moving into the body, and warm blood is moving out of the body. Well, not out of the body, but you understand what I mean. Moving towards the areas that have been cooled by breathing. And eventually what will happen is this capillary network will cool the blood entering the brain, and the animal doesn't overheat. Also, these animals are able to withstand overheating far better than we can. We can usually get to about 38, and then it starts really we start really getting into trouble. Once you're hitting 40, we're dead. Gemsbok have been known to survive body temperatures up to 40 degrees, which is incredible actually, because we would have permanent brain damage if we actually had that sort of temperature affecting our body. This is a little prime by contrast. You can just see he doesn't have a Rete Mirabella. But yeah, and a lot of animals have evolved them independently. So they've occurred in many goat species, not all goat species, and also some sheep species. A lot of the desert antelope have them. Certain Indian antelope also have them, but the Gemsboks and the Oryxes are well known in Africa for having them. Okay, another thing we're going to talk about is thermal regulation, which we tapped on briefly there. What you'll notice about these animals is that they're bright white and have hard contrasting black on them. And that actually helps with thermal regulation. So as we know, that dark colors heat up faster than light colors. So you have 2 very hard contrasting areas of color on the body. And the warm areas will cause rapid heating and rapid expansion of the air, and the lighter areas don't heat up as quickly. So what you actually have is you have a series of thermal regulations. So you will have the warmer body heating up. Sorry, my laptop is distracting me. The warmer aspects, the darker aspects heating up faster than the lighter aspects. And what will happen is that this area will heat up and it will rise and move away from the body, and this area being cooler will drop down, and creating a regulatory effect. They've also observed this in zebras as well, with actually far more accuracy, and also wildebeest. But it does have some effect on the Gemsbok and the Oryx species as well. The face is exactly the same situation there. The hard contrast causes a shifting between hot and cool air on the body. A couple of degrees difference can create all sorts of wonderful effects in terms of thermal regulation. Another thing that we need to talk about is Dazzle Camouflage. Now, Dazzle Camouflage, a lot of people touch on it, but it's actually a lot more important than people realize, and it is crucial to survival of a lot of plains animals. You'll notice that animals that live out in the open tend to have these hard, contrasting colors that don't really make sense. You think they want to have this vague blending into the background, but actually Dazzle Camouflage is the way to go. And what it does is it actually breaks up the contours of the animal, makes it very hard to interpret where the animal begins and where the animal ends. If you're looking at this herd of hens book over here, you really would have a hard time on casual observation picking out the head and the tail and the legs and the body. It's just a mess. It's hard, it's confusing, it's disorientating, and it makes it very difficult to pinpoint one animal. Zebras, by contrast as well, also the same situation, that Dazzle Camouflage. And you just get disorientated on casual observation looking at these animals, and you're not able to fully identify one. And the more the better. Even with one, it's still accurate. Now, this technology was actually employed by the British to protect their ships in World War II. A lot of people don't realize this. Everyone sees ships in bright, or sorry, not bright, but like bright white or grays or matte dull colors, and usually a monotone color. But this technology was actually employed towards the later end of World War II to great success. Once radar came into the play, it fell out because it became redundant. But before that, with fighter pilots and bombers relying exclusively on their eyes, to pinpoint a ship was extremely difficult. Of course, it would stand out on the horizon, but to say where's the HQ, where are the gun turrets, where's the bulk of the ship, where are the ammunition bays, all these aspects, where's the radar kept, they couldn't really identify because the ship was very disorientating and very confusing to pinpoint. And you can see again, trying to make heads or tails of a ship when you're flying over it at 400 kilometers an hour is quite challenging. So Dazzle Camouflage is actually very effective for animals out in the open as well. It seems counterintuitive, but it's actually the best way of defending yourself. You can see all these over here. Now, another animal that unfortunately went extinct in 1800 was the bluebuck. It was a relative of the gemsbok and also of the sable. It was the bluebuck for a reason because it had a bluish tinge to its fur, and it had initially receded during the Ice Age. Its territory was found all the way up to Central Africa. And then once the Ice Age started to end about 30,000 years ago, they were outcompeted by other antelope, and they gradually receded, became a Cape specialist for quite a few thousand years. They were not really pursued by the hunter-gatherer bushmen because they really couldn't keep up with them in any sort of numbers. But once the Europeans arrived with their muskets and very much earlier on crossbows, they hunted them to extinction. And by 1800, not a single one was left, unfortunately. So they were hunted. Apparently the meat was not very tasty. They were just hunted for sport because they were very attractive and everyone wanted to have a carpet. In fact, the only known specimen that I could find is actually in a Vienna museum, the Vienna Museum of Natural History. That's the only one that I know would actually have any sample left over. They may have others, but I don't know of any others. So that is the history of the bluebuck. Unfortunately, another victim or another casualty in man's bloodlust for shooting things for his entertainment. So you know where I stand on that particular issue. Okay, so as I said before, the populations have been declined from climate change for several thousand years. The last remaining populations settled in the Cape. They became a fambos specialist, and they were intrinsically linked to the fambos until the European settlers arrived, and it made it a very appealing target, and it was just eradicated, unfortunately. Now, the next group are the Acephalafini, which is a great name in my opinion. Now, there are 4 genera, 6 species. These guys used to occur right through to Eastern Asia, but pretty much since the rise of mankind, they've been extirpated out of Asia, and the remaining populations are only in Africa. Also, one of these species was originally domesticated during the times of Egyptians, but again, hunted to extinction. So the black wildebeest and the blue wildebeest, we all know the blue wildebeest, but the black wildebeest is smaller and, in my opinion, far more attractive. Bontebok and blesbok. There's some debate which is the dominant species and which is the subspecies. Most scientists today actually agree that the Bontebok is the dominant lead strain and the blesbok is a subspecies of the Bontebok. Other scientists disagree, and I'm not going to debate that today because I'm not a geneticist. We've all got our opinions. Okay, and the Hartebeest, which has a variety of subspecies, Liechtensteins, and a variety from East Africa as well. So, Wildebeest are actually really impressive animals. They are, I've been told, and I also believe they're too dumb to die. I've seen animals who've been ripped in half and they're carrying going for kilometers before they finally kneel over. They're very successful breeders, and they are an incredible species, in my opinion, all the species of wildebeest and their relatives. And one of the things that makes them really interesting is the fact that they're resistant to parasites, far more resistant than other bovids. Remember, bovids are not bovines. Bovines are cattle. Bovids are any animal with horns. Now, bovids, they're quite susceptible to things like foot and mouth disease, heart water, and a variety of other diseases. But healthy blue wildebeests have been recorded to have up to 35 parasite species, including 18 worm species, 3 lice species, and 7 tick species, and they are none the worse for it. If you had to throw that at cattle, they would be dying. In fact, a single wildebeest has been recorded to having up to 20,000 ticks on its body. So bear in mind that a buffalo is usually 35,000 ticks, and a buffalo is up to 5 times the size of a wildebeest in terms of mass. So up to 20,000 ticks on a wildebeest and it still keeps going strong is incredible. And because of this particular predilection for being immune to ticks and immune to parasites, they pose a threat to other domestic and wildlife. That's why usually whenever they have a cattle in an area, they blast at all the wildebeest, because wildebeest are vectors for a variety of diseases. They're pretty much immune, but they pass it on to all sorts of other animals. And despite this, it's estimated, even though they're so immune, because they're just such filthy animals, it's reckoned that just under 50% of them actually die of diseases because they're just constantly living in their own filth. They're pretty gross, actually. And they say only about 15% of wildebeest actually die from predation. The rest are from natural causes or from injuries or other. But 50% still die from diseases, even though they're still so immune to these diseases. But they'd probably be far higher if they didn't have these immunities. So another thing, talking about immunities, is the Rinderpest. Now, the Rinderpest was the worst thing to ever happen to ruminants. It doesn't seem to affect many other animals. It affects swines to some capacity and camels to some capacity, but not on the same level. Now, Rinderpest is a highly contagious virus that affects even-toed ungulates, ruminants. And it could spread, it's spread by either breathing, you breathe in the air particles from individuals around you, or more commonly through water or through saliva in close proximity to other animals. It has an almost 100% fatal rate in most animal populations, especially in populations where the animals are naive. And now there's several strains of this, and even animals that are immune to one strain can be susceptible to another strain, and it's just a nasty piece of work. And it's originally appeared in Central Asia, and it's broken its way into Europe several times, into Africa several times, but usually because of the isolation of African populations, there wasn't a real impact on Africa. Now, it's also thought that measles is a zoonotic strain of Rinderpest. Remember, zoonotic diseases are diseases that are passed from animals onto humans. So measles, they reckon, because of the close proximity of humans and cattle living together for such long periods of time, it was only a matter of time before the virus managed to make its jump. It evolved to the point where it could actually jump from one species to another. And the last known case of Rinderpest, thankfully, was in 2001. We think it's eradicated. It may pop up again somewhere. Maybe some isolated population has it and are carriers or vectors of the disease. But right now, we think we got it zapped. The biggest outbreak, sorry, we'll come to that in a second. The biggest outbreak was at the beginning of the 20th century, and we'll come to that in a moment. So very common symptoms was the first thing would be a loss of appetite and a constantly running discharges from the eyes and from the nose, just like pretty much just leaking fluids. And then sores and cysts would appear around the mouth, the nose, around the genitals and the anus as well. Just a nasty, nasty disease. And then the animal would start getting aggressive diarrhea, intermixed with bouts of constipation, and then diarrhea again, and then rapid weight loss from all this just hell going on in the body. And then death usually occurs, a very sad, miserable death would usually occur within 6 to 12 days. And the only way to control this disease is to shoot all your cattle and walk away and hope it doesn't jump to the next lodge. The way that farmers used to deal with this in the past is that if they didn't have access to inoculating their cattle before, giving them vaccines, is that if it popped up in one individual, they'd shoot the entire population out. And that was the only way of dealing with it, and making sure it didn't spread further. So South Africa's biggest case of the Rinderpest happened in 1896, and this was brought on because of mass migrations of people coming in through East Africa, pushing down with the Nguni tribes down to East Africa and intermingling with the European settlers. And the sudden explosion of cattle and intermixing of movements of cattle from various areas, and also because of the pressures put on wild populations of ruminants by hunters and by colonial settlers, was moving a lot of animals around. Where a lot of animals used to be sedentary and stay in one area, there was a lot of movement, and so this population, or not the population, the virus just swept down the east coast of Africa in 1896. And it finally reached the Cape around in about 1900. 90% of all domestic and wild ruminant populations of sheep, goats, cattle, springbok, impala, everything, just complete genocide. I mean, utter expungement of populations, absolutely horrific. So numerous accounts state that there were only 50 buffalo left in South Africa at the turn of the century. Now, I can't prove this, but from all the sources I've read a couple of books about the history of the Boer War, and also from about the impact of Rinderpest on the Boer War. And a lot of them say that 50 buffalo in the entire country were left. So all the buffalo that we have today are apparently descendants of the 50 that survived the Rinderpest. Again, if someone can prove me wrong, I'd love to be proven wrong, but from what I've read, that's the case. Now, because of this complete collapse of the breeding population of cattle, mass starvations ensue. Remember, a lot of the Nguni tribes, the Bantu tribes along East Africa and Southern Africa rely on cattle as a staple of their diet, and also for European settlers as labor as well. So there was a complete collapse in terms of farming practices because farmers couldn't plow their fields, they couldn't grow crops, and all this, it was just this massive cascade effect. And on top of this was just the resultant loss of income. Remember, people were breeding cattle and selling meat, and there was just this sudden disappearance of income. Because of this, well, at the same time as this, there was the gold rush happening in Johannesburg in the 1800s and the 1880s and 1890s. And huge flocks of recently impoverished people fled to these big urban centers looking for work to try to supplement the income and also just to find food. A large number of people actually came from Zululand, and it put pressure on these cities. The cities quadrupled in size overnight, and the sudden population explosion resulted in the Republic of the Vaal at that stage having a far larger political and economic influence than they anticipated, or the entire world anticipated. And also, it became a very multicultural society. You had Indians, blacks, whites, Afrikaners, English, all living together in one city, all vying. And of course, there was a lot of tension and pressure. There was a lot of British people putting pressure on England, saying that we need to be protected from the sudden influx of prospectors looking for support, and we basically needed our jobs taken care of. England, under the guise of Roan, orchestrated or set up the designs for the Boer War. So, of course, there were other aspects as well, but a major proponent of the war was the Rinderpest outbreak, which really just crushed South Africa's economy in one aspect. Well, not so much the economy, but its agricultural economy. And it just made it almost solely reliant on gold. And so it was a sudden shift in attitude. And this also created particular difficulties during the Boer War when the Boers went into the concentration camps. And a lot of that cattle that they would actually rely on for dried meat, for the biltong, for example, was suddenly not there. And they were relying on grains, particularly just to survive on. Those grains did not last very long as well. They would break, they would decay, and there was a lot of mass starvation. Even in the areas where starvation wasn't deliberately enforced, people were just not having enough food. So a lot of the casualties incurred during the Boer War was as a result of Rinderpest as well. So that is our conclusion today for the final class, well, not the final class, but the end of ruminants. Next week, we start with whales and cetaceans. We've got 20 minutes left. Does anyone want to have a chat? You're more than welcome to ask questions. How does this thing end? Cool. So guys, if you want to put your microphones on, ask questions, go for it.
Nick,
Yes.
the symptoms of Rinderpest, was that the thickening of the tongue, or just describe exactly what they
So it was, okay, I assume thickening of the tongue. That's a very common symptom with a lot of cattle diseases. But again, running discharges, listlessness, laziness, loss of appetite, aggressive sores around the mouth and the anus and the genital regions and also the nose, inside the nose, inside the mouth, just miserable experience. And there's just a constant discharge of diarrhea, basically shitting itself to death. So
okay, but where would that have come from? What is it?
It came from Central Asia. It came from Central Asia, and with the various colonial wars going along between the Italians and the Greeks and the British and the French and everything up in northeast Africa and also through the Saudi regions, those diseases were pushed because remember there are a lot of cattle being imported to feed troops in those areas. So those cattle which had partial immunities to the disease brought it along with them. They didn't die. They may have died later, but they didn't die. And they would have intermingled with the native animals and eventually just it would have shifted down the population. Remember, there was a very tumultuous time. People were moving around a lot. There were huge movements of people down up and down the east coast of Africa. Britain was attempting to build a railroad from Cape to Cairo. Never came through. It was the rise of Rhodesia, northern Rhodesia as well. It was a really tumultuous time. It was chaos.
And that's the Differquane. Would that be the Differquane? I don't know if that's the right word. Where the Differquane, where the Africans came down Africa.
Infekane. No, that was about.
How do you say it? Sorry.
Infekane.
Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
that was about more than 100 years before. But yeah,
okay.
And that extended right through to the time of Shaka, which was in the 1820s. So that was from the 1750s to the 1820s. That was Infekane. That was the Great Migration coming down from the east coast of Africa, and that was before the Rinderpest outbreak. Ian, Cape Buffalo, just buffalo. When I say buffalo, I'm talking about Cape Buffalo. Remember, we call them African buffalo, or even in some parts of Africa, they call them water buffalo, although we know water buffalo is the Asian buffalo. The African buffalo, the Cape Buffalo. And again, I stand to be corrected. I couldn't find any contradicting sources. And a lot of this is hearsay because it's Pete up the, these two are telling us stories. So, as far as I know, only 50 Cape buffalo survived in South Africa. Again, I stand to be corrected if that is wrong. But again, 90%, they reckon that 90% of all the ruminants in sub-Saharan Africa died. So, pretty bad time for everybody.
And can you connect the measles thing?
Well, measles is as I said, there's no evidence, but they've shown that there's enough genetic evidence to prove that it was a zoonotic disease, simply because of the constant interaction, going back long before the Rinderpest outbreak in Africa, going back to like the 1500s, 1600s, the constant interaction between humans and cattle living in close proximity. Diseases, viruses, like everything else, evolve, and all it takes is that one mutation, one time to be able to jump onto a human host, and then it spreads into the human population like wildfire. And that's what happened with measles. And the same was happening with COVID-19. COVID-19 was a viral disease for bats, but the constant interaction between humans and bats in a wet market environment allowed the virus to mutate just once enough, just by a happy chance to have a mutation that allowed it to cling to a human host. And then it replicated from there. So zoonotic diseases happen quite regularly. HIV as well. HIV has been in chimp populations for millennia. They have discovered chimpanzees in the DNA of chimpanzee bones dating back tens of thousands of years to have HIV. And simply through the bushmeat trade, we reckon that must have been sometime in the 1950s, even possibly earlier, that it entered into the African human population. But what I was reading about the history of HIV, which is really interesting, is that there are rumors of sailors coming from North Africa from the 1500s, settling in Italy, and displaying symptoms that by today's standards are comparable to HIV. And actually, there was a group of scientists that took samples of these guys. I don't know how. I was reading about this in this particular article. And they apparently said that although the samples are too degraded, there's evidence to show these sailors back in the 1500s may have actually had HIV. So it may have been in the African populations going back well over 500 years. And sailors obviously intermingling with these people may have actually had it. So it broke out into America in the 1980s, but we know it was in Africa since the 1950s, possibly even earlier.
I have to tell you that Freddie Mercury
Yeah.
Apparently. I mean, he's known to have passed away from AIDS. But I remember him coming out to Sun City many, many years ago, kind of like his last when it happened. And he lost his voice completely. And from then it was downhill.
Yeah.
So that's on the AIDS side of it.
And that's just a complete, AIDS, as I said, it's not the virus, it's the deficiency from the virus. So that's a whole other thing. But again, with zoonotic diseases, there's lots of them. I mean, SARS, swine flu, chicken flu, bird flu, they're all zoonotic. So it pops up, and this is, again, the issue with breeding animals in high numbers. And this is a strong argument for vegetarianism. The easiest way to stay away from zoonotic diseases is to consume meat, well, wild meat as frequently as possible, because wild animals, they are, exposed to a lot more diseases than we are. And if you are going to eat wild meat, which I always do propose, is eat an animal that is biologically far away from you as possible, like a ruminant. Where if you're eating wild ruminants, there's not much chance of them going to be able to pass the disease on to you. But it still can happen. And again, it's just the breeding in high numbers is the biggest cause. Don't be a cannibal. Don't eat primates. There we go, as Addie says. Fully agree. Do not eat primates. It's super dangerous to eat primates. I mean, this thing with the bushmeat trade in Africa, it's as dangerous as eating another human being. On top of the fact that primates are, and it's not just because it's unethical, it's dangerous to eat humans, because you can pick up all sorts of diseases from consuming humans. And that's the same thing with primates. I mean, chimpanzees can pick up most of the diseases we can, and vice versa. And the further you stray away from yourself, the less likely you are to pick up a disease that you can catch. Remember, there's diseases that bats get that we can't get, but it's only when you have that constant interaction with them. I would say it's probably fairly safe to go catch a bat in the wild and cook it and eat it on an occasion. It'd probably be fine. The chances of you actually getting a disease from it are fairly slim. But it's that constant interaction, taking tens of thousands of bats, cramming them into captivity, allowing the disease to replicate in a closed, unhygienic environment, and then finally it mutates to the point where it can jump onto a human host. That's the danger. So if you are going to eat an animal, eat something that's living a healthy life.
I've got a question before you shut off.
Still got 10 minutes. So
story of the black and white stripes being able to distribute heat and thermoregulate.
Mm-hmm.
The animals, say for example a zebra, have different arterial venous supplies to those areas that can move it away. How does that actually work physiologically?
No, well, it's just simply because I'll answer your question in a second. He just wrote a question. How it simply works is that if you take a black car and a white car and you put them next to each other and you put a thermostat inside the one and inside the other and you measure the temperature difference, the black car will be substantially hotter than the white car. Now, if you know anything about convection and currents, this is basically where the areas move from areas of high pressure to areas of low pressure. And what causes high pressure is that it's cooler temperatures called high pressure because the air contracts. And if you have air that is heated up, it expands. And if it expands, it rises. So what you have is you have air rising and air from the cooler area next to it moving into it. That's what creates wind. That's why we're having all this wind in Durban, is because we have a high pressure cell moving into a low pressure cell. And that's exactly the same situation happens with, if you have a hot surface and a cold surface, air from the cold surface being denser will roll into the area on the hot surface because the hot surface's air is rising. And dense objects will take over the space of vacuous objects. So it's an experiment. So if you just simply if you've got a fish tank, you pour water into the one side, it'll even out. It won't all stay on the one side, it will flow into this.
Okay.
Because air is less dense than water, and the same thing applies. Dense air is more dense than warm air, or cold air is more dense than warm air. So
the more absorptive areas the blood that gets heated up in the more absorptive areas will move through the cooling areas. And
not
generally,
so much that. It's just that the circulation, the convection on the surface of the animal is cooling down.
Mm-hmm.
So it does not so much that the capillaries are guiding blood from cold area to warm area, vice versa. That's in the Rete Mirabella. The capillaries just go straight back into the middle of the body. But what it does do is that it's simply because you're having those convection currents on top of the surface of the body, it's cooling the animal down. It's basically having a fan on top of it. If you want to imagine, like you took a fan to your face and you've got cool air blowing over the body the whole time, cooling it down. In fact, a lot of modern military camouflage is experimenting with ways of doing this as well to keep soldiers cool in battle conditions. But the problem with this, of course, is that having hard contrast in battle and camouflage is very difficult because you have these very contrasting images. And although Dazzle Camouflage may work for ships, it doesn't work so much for a soldier standing out in the open because you just have to shoot a soldier and he dies. You know, whereas a ship you have to hit key points in the ship to make it safe. So so those hard contrasting things, they've experimented with camouflage with uniforms. It is possible. That's why often you'll see with sportsmen as well, they have contrasting colors, and there's been a lot of evidence to show that hard contrasting colors can have this thermoregulation on the body as well. It's not like air conditioning, but it does make a fraction of a difference, and a fraction of a difference can save your life.
Okay.
Cool. Can I answer?
Sorry, Nick. Nick, can I just ask you about that Rinderpest again?
Yeah. Sorry, I've got a question. Ian. Sorry, is this you, Ian?
No, I'm not. No, it's Heath.
Can I? Sorry, Heath. Can I just answer a question for Ian quickly and then get straight on to you?
No problem. No problem.
Okay, so Ian, you can consume the liver of a ruminant. Eating the liver of anything in high numbers is bad for you because livers are processing waste material. But remember, we talked about biomagnification and predators at the top and prey items at the bottom. You're not going to be getting many toxins from prey items as you are from predator items. So you can eat liver. I love liver, but don't eat it every single day. Eat it maybe once a week, twice a week. In fact, probably more than once a week isn't very good for you. But yeah, so go ahead and have as much ox liver as you want. Okay, next question. I'll get to you in a second. The water buck with all the glands on their skin. How often will a lion kill a water buck? Lions don't seem to really care, in my opinion. I've seen cheetahs, which are very fussy predators, take down a water buck. So it doesn't seem to affect their interest whatsoever. It seems to maybe deter human predators, but that's about it. Lions and leopards, they're not fussy. They'll eat whatever they can get their hands on. Okay, Heath, let's go.
All right, I just wanted to ask, that's zoonotic. I gather from animal to human, that's fairly basic. But now, were you sort of implying that the human measles caused the...
No.
Well, I see.
No. So human measles came from Rinderpest, not the other way around.
Oh, okay. So because I see it also causes distemper in dogs, which was also something interesting that I've just seen.
I did not know. Thank you. You taught me something interesting. I did not know that. Or maybe I read it somewhere and I didn't pay attention to it, but yeah, cool.
All right.
Thank you. That's actually...
So the Rinderpest was there first, basically, and then it came back to us getting measles and our dogs getting distemper, basically. Something to that extent. Okay, cool. No, that's fine.
So zoonotic, and it does happen the other way around. You do get diseases jumping from humans to animals, but not as often, because humans typically, by virtue of the fact that we are able to express our opinions, we don't want to be crammed in cages in high numbers and living, literally on top of each other like a Filipino prison our entire lives. So, the opportunities for us to breed diseases that might become zoonotic for animals, less likely. But I'm sure there are examples. I'll just have to look up some examples.
Yeah, no, that's great. Okay, cool. Thanks.
Cool.
Nick, you spoke yesterday or on Saturday, the noise was a pet bat. Are you keeping a bat as a pet? I'm just curious.
No. Did I say a bat on Saturday? I don't remember.
I thought I heard a bat. It's creaking noise.
You said cat. It was the cat that was sneezing.
Oh, okay. Yesterday, sorry. My mom's cat. I was in my mother's
My
house.
apologies. I talking about bat today.
Yeah.
Apologies.
No. My mother's cat, she's got flu. I was visiting my mother yesterday because I just got back to Durban. I popped in to visit my mom, and I figured, screw it, I'll just do Class C because the Wi-Fi's better. I'm just doing this with data at the moment. I bought a package for cheap, so yay, fun. But yeah, the Wi-Fi's better at my mom's house, so I was there, and the cat was in the background, slurping and sneezing and doing her thing. She's got cat flu. Hopefully not.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Anyway. She's sweet enough, but I'm not using cats. Yeah. Cool. We still have like 5 minutes. So any other questions? And I'm still going to do another Q&A on Saturday because it's kind of rules are rules. So we can do on Saturday as well.
Excuse me, you made reference, I think it was on the Oryxes, you were talking about the desert-like thing, and I was just thinking of camels. Is there similarity between those Oryxes and camels and other desert animals, the way they hold water?
Well, no, the camels are specialized in retaining water. So they're not, apart from the fact that they're both even to ungulates, they are not related. They are millions of years separated. We're talking like 30 million years separated. But their ability, the Rete Mirabella has evolved independently in both animals. They look different, but they function the same. That's why they have the same name. The Gemsbok and the Oryxes, they don't retain water like those fatty humps. They just rather have far better usage of water. And also what they do is their nasal cavities actually recycle water as well. So they actually, I'm not sure how the mechanism works, but it actually has a mechanism inside that actually somehow recycles water. So when they breathe out, they don't breathe out as much water because we got water vapor in our breath. But something about it, I'll have to look it up and I'll give you an answer next time. But I know that there's something that actually recycles the water. So as they breathe out, it doesn't actually spend that much water, whereas camels don't seem to do that as far as I know. So camels are just really fatty. They're all about the curves, and they retain a lot more water. Whereas Gemsbok can, like camels, can also lose a lot of water, but they seem to have different mechanisms for water loss. Okay, Ian was about to chirp me about the cats. Okay, yeah. Our mom has 3 cats, and yeah, we've had this discussion many times. So she's promised no more cats after these cats pass the mortal coil. All right,
Nick.
Yes.
Nick, it's Kevin here. I've often wondered when North America opened up.
Yeah.
They used horses to pull the wagons. Why did they never use even import horses into southern Africa to pull wagons rather than use oxen?
I think it's a matter of culture, to be honest. I mean, it could be diseases. I mean, this is an area for once, I don't have a real answer. I think a lot of times it's just culture and preference, eh? You might find that horses are more water needing than cattle, certain breeds, so they just prefer cattle. African horse sickness, there we go. African horse sickness, there we go. Addie, the horse lady, knows more than me, so that's why. African horse sickness. I did not know the answer to that, so for once I got schooled. Okay, so I should probably try to learn some more about horses. Okay, horse diseases. Yeah, okay, so there's your answer right there. Whereas obviously the ruminants in North America, remember, apart from the bison, there are not too many ruminants left in North America. They're mostly the deer, and they're limited in lower numbers to the forest areas and the mountainous areas. But the Great Plains of America are just limited to only a few species. So you probably find there's not that much diversity in terms of diseases for horses and that sort of stuff in North America. So, okay, the Boer boys were stronger and more resistant. Okay. And the British horses died like flies. A bit dark, but okay. Yeah, so there we go. Ooh, anyone else? We've got like another minute remaining. If that's all.
I was just thinking about your comment about the Bontebok and the Blesbok, and being from Cape Town, of course, I know Bontebok better than the Blesbok.
Yeah.
Where is the line that to me, this is so amazing, the line that distinguishes the Bontebok from the Blesbok, because in the Swellen Dam, you still got Bontebok, but when you go over to Eastern Cape, there's some Gemsbok. I'm just trying to find a divisional line between the Bontebok and the Gemsbok. No, sorry,
you probably
Bontebok and the Blesbok on the geographical plane.
This is hard for me to state because the original populations have been so mixed up and so jumbled around by human trading like Pokemon. So there's the original populations obviously were divided geographically, but human were like, I mean, I've seen freaking Blesbok and Bontebok in KZN, like just around the corner from Pietermaritzburg, and they don't historically occur there. They put them onto those nature reserves. So a lot of the jumbling and mixing up of genes. So the definitive line, you probably have to go back to a historical book, which I couldn't really answer for you because I don't really know those animals in terms of their historical distribution that well, because I work more on the eastern side of the country. So as I said, there would have been geographical separation, and over time they've just been mixed up on reserves. And now it's illegal to have both species on the same reserve because both subspecies on the same reserve because they interbreed. So anyway, yeah. We're going to do another Q&A on Saturday, so I can get more into detail. I'm going to do a quick, I'll look up on the Blessed Book and the Bonta book and give you a more definitive answer on Saturday. So I'll see you guys then. We've got like 10 seconds, guys. Thank you very much. Auf Wiedersehen. Adios. Arrivederci. Thanks for all the emails from everybody that's given me an email